Imagine this: a quiet suburban neighborhood where life feels safe, predictable, and unshaken by the chaos of the outside world. A loving family of three, the Johnsons, were living their version of the American dream. James, the father, was a hard-working man who adored his wife, Sarah, and their vibrant, curious 3-year-old son, Aiden. It was a cool, sunny Sunday morning, and the family had just returned from church, laughter and warmth filling their home as they prepared for a fun outing. They couldn't have known this would be the last moment they'd share this peace together. The plan was simple: a drive to Aiden's favorite park for a picnic. The air was filled with the aroma of fresh sandwiches Sarah had packed, and the back seat brimmed with toys Aiden couldn't wait to play with. As they buckled up, James playfully teased Aiden, who giggled uncontrollably. Life, at that moment, felt perfect, but as they turned onto the main highway, everything changed in an instant. Without warning, an out-of-control SUV swerved across the median, its tires screeching and its driver honking frantically. James barely had time to react before the SUV slammed into the side of their car with a force that sounded like a bomb had exploded. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and screams filled the air. The Johnsons' car spun out of control, careening off the road and into a ditch. When the dust settled, the scene was nothing short of catastrophic. The front end of the car was mangled beyond recognition, smoke billowing from the engine. James was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Sarah, bruised and bleeding, clawed at her seatbelt, crying out for her son. In the back seat, little Aiden was eerily still, his small body pinned beneath the crumpled frame of the car. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their faces grave as they assessed the situation. Aiden was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his heart weak and fading. Despite their best efforts, the unthinkable happened. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Aiden was declared clinically dead each time, only for his tiny heart to start beating again moments later. The medical staff was baffled, and his family was devastated. But what no one could have anticipated was what Aiden would bring back with him from the brink of death. As Aiden lay lifeless on the hospital bed, his consciousness drifted away, leaving behind the sounds of frantic doctors and the cold beeps of machines. He later described it as if he had been pulled out of his small, broken body, weightless and free. He could see the room from above, watching his parents cry and the doctors work tirelessly to save him. Yet he felt no fear, only a strange, comforting calm. Then, in a blink, everything changed. He was no longer in the sterile hospital room, but in a place that defied explanation. Aiden found himself in an endless field of light, where colors he couldn't describe danced in harmony. The air was alive, not with oxygen, but with something he would later call pure love. The ground beneath him felt soft, as though it were made of clouds, and the sky shimmered with a golden glow, though there was no sun. And then he saw him, a figure so radiant, it seemed to be made of light itself, yet not blinding. Aiden instinctively knew who it was: Jesus. There was no need for introductions. The recognition was instant, as though he had always known him. Jesus extended a hand toward the boy, his eyes filled not with judgment, but with a love so profound it made Aiden feel safe, even joyful, despite the circumstances. Jesus didn't speak with words, but his presence communicated directly to Aiden's soul. He conveyed warmth, comfort, and an unshakable sense of peace. Yet there was something else, a warning. Jesus showed Aiden visions of a raging fire, devouring forests, homes, and cities. He saw terrified people fleeing their homes, smoke darkening the skies, and a sense of overwhelming loss and despair. Though he was only 3, Aiden understood the gravity of what he was being shown. "You must go back," the message seemed to say, resonating in his very being. "You have a mission." Aiden didn't want to leave. This place felt like home, far more than Earth ever had. But he trusted Jesus, and in an instant, he felt himself pulled away, tumbling through a tunnel of light and warmth. The next thing he knew, his eyes fluttered open in the hospital room. He was back, but he wasn't the same. What he had seen, and the message he carried, would change his family's lives forever. Aiden stood in awe, his small frame barely comprehending the grandeur of the place he found himself in. The golden light that surrounded him was warm, not like sunlight, but something far more profound. It didn't just touch his skin. It seemed to wrap around his very soul, filling him with a peace so deep he could hardly believe it. He felt as though he were part of the light, as if the love it radiated had always been there, waiting for him to return to it. And then he saw him. Jesus stood before Aiden, radiating a light that was somehow even brighter than the golden glow around him. His presence was overwhelming, but not in a frightening way. It was comforting, like the embrace of a parent Aiden had known his whole life. Jesus didn't look like the paintings or stories Aiden had heard in Sunday school. He was more real, more alive, and more powerful than anything Aiden could have imagined. His face held kindness, wisdom, and an indescribable love that brought tears to the boy's eyes, even though he didn't fully understand why. Aiden felt Jesus' gaze, and in that instant, every fear, every trace of pain from the accident melted away. It was as though he had been stripped of every burden he didn't know he carried. His tiny hands reached out instinctively, and though he didn't touch Jesus, he felt as if his entire being was held in an embrace. "Am I home?" Aiden's innocent thoughts seemed to echo, though he didn't speak them aloud. Jesus' expression softened, his love pouring into Aiden without words. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a moment of pure connection, where Aiden felt completely known and understood. Every question he didn't know he had was answered in that gaze. But there was more. Aiden began to feel a pull, a sensation that this moment was not just for him. There was a reason he was here, a purpose far greater than his young mind could yet grasp. Jesus reached out a hand, not to beckon Aiden forward, but to show him something. The golden light shifted, giving way to a vision so vivid it seemed to unfold all around Aiden. He saw flames, towering, relentless walls of fire tearing through forests, consuming homes, and casting thick black smoke into the sky. The air was heavy with the cries of people running for their lives, their faces twisted in fear and desperation. It wasn't just the fire's destruction that terrified Aiden. It was the sense of something deeper, a warning that this was not just a random disaster, but a result of something greater, something broken in the world. Jesus stood beside Aiden, his expression somber but not angry. Aiden felt the gravity of what he was being shown. This is coming, the message seemed to say, though no words were spoken. Aiden's small heart ached with the weight of it. He saw the flames raging through Los Angeles, Hollywood landmarks reduced to ash, families fleeing as the inferno consumed everything in its path. This must be shared, Aiden understood. The weight of the mission was overwhelming for a 3-year-old, but in Jesus' presence, he felt the strength to carry it. He saw flashes of people who would need to hear his story, faces he didn't recognize but felt were important. Jesus' love, though unshakable, carried a sense of urgency, as if time itself was pressing forward. "But what can I do?" Aiden's thoughts trembled. Jesus responded, not with words, but with an unshakable sense of reassurance that filled Aiden's entire being. "You will speak. You will warn them. You will remind them that love, faith, and hope are what will save them." And just like that, the vision began to fade. Aiden was overcome with emotion, fear, awe, sorrow, but also hope. The golden light enveloped him again, a final reassurance that he was not alone. As Aiden's consciousness began to return to the hospital room, he clung to the memory of the flames, the faces, and the message he was now tasked to share. His body was small and fragile, but his spirit had been ignited with a mission far greater than himself. And as he opened his eyes, he knew he had been sent back to tell the world what he had seen, no matter how difficult it might be. The hospital room was a symphony of controlled chaos, with doctors and nurses hovering over Aiden's small, fragile body. Machines beeped rhythmically, marking the passage of time and the tenuous hold he had on life. After flatlining for the 3rd time, a nurse whispered to herself, "This might be it," her voice laced with exhaustion and sorrow. The medical team had pushed every boundary of their expertise. They were about to call it, but something stopped them. Then, as if an unseen force intervened, Aiden's heart monitor spiked, a steady rhythm resuming where silence had reigned moments before. Gasps rippled through the room. The head doctor leaned in, his face a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "We've got a pulse," he announced, his voice shaky with a combination of relief and bewilderment. Aiden's small body began to stir. His fingers twitched, and his eyelids fluttered open. The fluorescent lights above seemed harsh compared to the radiant warmth he had just left, but Aiden's eyes held a clarity that startled everyone. The room fell silent as he looked around, his gaze finally landing on his mother, Sarah, who had been holding her breath for what felt like an eternity. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached for her son's hand. "Aiden, baby, you're back," she whispered, her voice cracking with a mix of joy and overwhelming emotion. Aiden's small fingers curled around hers, weak but purposeful. "Mommy," he said softly, his voice hoarse but steady. His words sent a ripple of shock and relief through the room. The boy who had been declared clinically dead not once, not twice, but 3 times was alive and coherent. The medical staff exchanged glances, their professionalism temporarily overshadowed by awe. The lead doctor, a seasoned professional who had seen nearly everything, muttered, "I can't explain this. It's nothing short of a miracle." But Aiden's return wasn't just miraculous, it was purposeful. His eyes carried a seriousness far beyond his years. As he looked around the room, there was an unspoken understanding that he had something to say, something important. In the days following his miraculous return, Aiden's family tried to piece together what had happened. The doctor spoke cautiously about his recovery, warning of possible complications, but none came. Instead, Aiden seemed sharper, more present, as though his mind had been touched by something far beyond earthly understanding. Sitting at his bedside, Sarah gently stroked his hair. "You scared us, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and full of love. "But you're here now. That's all that matters." Aiden looked up at her with a seriousness that sent a chill down her spine. "Mommy, I saw him," he said quietly. His words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Sarah froze, unsure of what he meant. "Who, baby?" she asked cautiously, her heart racing. "Jesus," Aiden said, his voice unwavering. "He told me something." At first, Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She exchanged a glance with James, who had been sitting silently in the corner of the room. "What did he say?" James asked, his voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Aiden began to recount his experience, describing in vivid detail the golden light, the overwhelming love he felt, and the horrifying vision of flames consuming a city. "There's a fire coming," he said, his small voice trembling. "Big fires. People are going to lose their homes. Jesus said I have to tell people." Sarah's heart ached as she listened. How could her little boy, barely 3 years old, speak with such certainty about something so grave? She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was just a dream. But the way he spoke, the clarity in his eyes, made her pause. When word of Aiden's experience began to spread among family and close friends, reactions were mixed. Some were deeply moved, calling it a miracle and a sign. Others were skeptical, dismissing his words as the ramblings of a traumatized child. "It's just his brain trying to process what happened," one relative remarked. "Kids have wild imaginations." Despite the doubt and skepticism, Aiden remained steadfast. He spoke with a calmness that was unsettling for someone so young. "I have to tell them," he insisted. "They need to know." Sarah and James decided to share their son's story more widely, hoping it might resonate with someone who needed to hear it. But with each retelling, the reactions varied. Some were captivated, even inspired by Aiden's message, while others dismissed it outright. For Aiden, the skepticism didn't matter. He had seen what he had seen, and he carried the weight of the warning Jesus had given him. As more people listened and whispers of wildfires began to surface in news reports, the world started paying closer attention. But for Aiden and his family, the journey was only beginning. It started as a faint smell of smoke drifting through the crisp California air. Residents of Los Angeles dismissed it as a typical brush fire, a common occurrence in the arid hills surrounding the city. But within hours, what had begun as a single, isolated spark turned into a raging inferno. Fueled by high winds and a bone-dry landscape, the fires began their relentless march, devouring everything in their path. News reports described the devastation with grim urgency. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash as the flames tore through homes, businesses, and iconic Hollywood landmarks. The hills that once cradled sprawling mansions and historic estates were now ablaze, casting an eerie orange glow over the city. The Los Angeles Fire Department declared a state of emergency, with firefighters from across the state and neighboring regions called in to combat the inferno. The statistics were staggering. According to the most recent updates, over 150,000 acres have been scorched, with thousands of families forced to evacuate. Major highways were shut down, and the air quality had plummeted to hazardous levels, prompting warnings for residents to stay indoors. Satellite images showed plumes of smoke visible from space, a stark reminder of the fire's scale. The fire struck areas that many considered untouchable. Affluent neighborhoods in Beverly Hills and Pacific Palisades were evacuated, while parts of Hollywood were engulfed in flames. Schools, churches, and even wildlife sanctuaries became casualties of the blaze. Shelters overflowed with displaced residents, their faces etched with shock and grief. The situation was dire, and it seemed as though the flames had no intention of relenting. Amid the chaos, whispers of the boy's warning began to circulate. Those who had heard Aiden's story couldn't ignore the eerie parallels between his vivid descriptions and the unfolding disaster. But for many, it was too late to prepare. The fires, it seemed, were unstoppable, leaving only destruction in their wake. Sarah sat in front of the television, her hands trembling as she clutched the remote. The news anchor's voice was steady but somber as they recounted the day's devastation. Entire communities have been evacuated. The death toll is expected to rise as the fires continue to spread. Beside her, James stared at the screen in stunned silence, his mind racing with disbelief and dread. In the background, Aiden played quietly with a small toy truck, seemingly unaware of the weight of his earlier warning. But Sarah and James were acutely aware. The flames they saw on the screen were exactly as Aiden had described. The towering walls of fire, the darkened skies, the faces of terrified people running for safety. Aiden's vision wasn't a figment of his imagination. It was real, unfolding before their eyes. Sarah turned to James, her voice a hushed whisper. "He told us this would happen. He warned us." James nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "But we didn't believe him," he said, the words tasting bitter as they left his mouth. He thought back to the skepticism of their family and friends, the way they had hesitated to share Aiden's story with the world. Now, as the fires raged, he couldn't help but wonder if they could have done more to prepare people, to warn them. For Sarah, the validation of Aiden's warning was both a blessing and a curse. It was proof that her son had truly experienced something extraordinary, something divine. But it also brought a heavy burden of guilt and responsibility. She replayed his words in her mind. Jesus said, "I have to tell people." Had they done enough? As the family grappled with their emotions, Aiden remained calm, his demeanor strikingly mature for a 3-year-old. He didn't seem surprised by the news, as if he had already made peace with the inevitability of what he'd seen. "They'll be okay," he said softly, his words carrying a weight that belied his age. "Jesus told me they just need to remember him." The fires forced the family to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about faith, destiny, and their role in spreading Aiden's message. They began sharing his story more fervently, reaching out to anyone who would listen. Social media posts, interviews with local news outlets, and church gatherings became their platforms for amplifying Aiden's voice. For some, Aiden's warning became a beacon of hope amid the chaos. Churches organized prayer groups, while communities came together to support those displaced by the fires. But for Sarah and James, it was a humbling reminder of the profound responsibility they now carried. They had been entrusted with a message, one that had proven to be not just a warning, but a call to action. And now, they were determined to ensure that the world would hear it. The Johnsons knew they couldn't keep Aiden's story to themselves. The boy's message was not just a personal revelation. It was a call to action, a warning meant for the world. Fueled by both urgency and faith, Sarah and James began sharing Aiden's story with anyone who would listen. It started with their local church. Standing before the congregation, Sarah recounted the accident, Aiden's near-death experiences, and the horrifying vision he received from Jesus. As Aiden spoke softly into the microphone, describing the fire and Jesus' plea to share the message, the room fell silent. Many in the congregation were moved to tears, while others exchanged uneasy glances. For some, Aiden's words were a miracle. For others, they were unsettling. Soon, word of Aiden's experience spread beyond the church. Local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the boy's vivid account and the eerie accuracy of his warning about the LA fires. Reporters flocked to the Johnsons' home, their cameras capturing Aiden's shy demeanor and Sarah's earnest retelling of their ordeal. The story quickly gained traction, drawing both believers and skeptics. National media outlets soon followed. Aiden's story aired on morning talk shows and religious programs, his innocent voice captivating audiences. Clips of him describing Jesus and the fire spread across social media, sparking debates and conversations. Some praised his courage, calling his warning a divine message, while others dismissed it as the fanciful imagination of a child or a coincidence blown out of proportion. Despite the mixed reactions, the Johnsons remained steadfast. "This isn't about proving anything," James said during one interview. "It's about sharing what our son saw and helping people find hope and faith in the face of hardship." Churches across the country invited the family to speak, and prayer groups formed in response to Aiden's story. His warning became a symbol of resilience and divine intervention for those affected by the fires. Still, the family faced backlash from skeptics who accused them of exploiting their son's experience for attention. But Sarah and James knew the truth. They were simply following the mission Jesus had given their child. Days after the fires had been contained, the Johnson family sat together in their modest living room. The charred hills surrounding Los Angeles were beginning to heal, but the scars left on the city and on the family remained. Yet, there was a quiet strength in their hearts, a sense of purpose they hadn't known before. For Aiden, life had returned to some semblance of normalcy. He played with his toys, laughed with his parents, and occasionally asked to visit the park he loved so much. But he was different now. There was a wisdom in his eyes that seemed far beyond his 3 years. He didn't talk about the fire or Jesus as often, but when he did, it was with the same quiet certainty that had defined him since his return. Sarah and James found themselves transformed as well. The experience deepened their faith, bringing them closer to God and to each other. They prayed more often, not out of desperation, but out of gratitude and a desire to remain connected to the divine. They also became advocates for their community, organizing support for families displaced by the fires and spreading Aiden's message of hope and faith. "We were given this experience for a reason," Sarah said during a community gathering. "It's not just about the warning. It's about remembering that no matter how dark things seem, there's always light, always love." The family's story continued to inspire. People who had lost everything in the fires found comfort in Aiden's words, and his warning became a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of faith. For skeptics, the Johnsons' quiet humility and unwavering commitment to helping others spoke louder than any debate. As they reflected on everything they had been through, Sarah and James realized the true gift of Aiden's experience. It wasn't just about the message. It was about the love and resilience it brought to their family and their community. The fires had taken so much, but they had also united people in a way nothing else could. For the Johnsons, the journey was far from over. Aiden's story would continue to inspire and challenge those who heard it, and they knew they had been called to be stewards of that message. Their lives were forever changed, but they faced the future with hope, faith, and the knowledge that, even in the darkest moments, they were never alone. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more insane.